The fire crackled in the center of the Lakota camp, casting dancing shadows on the faces of those gathered. The scent of sage lingered in the air, and the low murmur of the wind carried whispers of an unseen world. Sitting Bull sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the flames, as though seeing beyond them into a realm no one else could reach. "I saw them," he began, his voice steady and deliberate. "Soldiers fell from the sky into our camp as helpless as grasshoppers. Their weapons failed them, their power vanished. The spirits have shown me this, our victory." This was no mere dream. It was a message from the spirit world, a glimpse of a future where his people would triumph against impossible odds. In 1876, this vision would become reality at the Battle of Little Bighorn, where Sitting Bull and his people would deliver the U.S. Army one of its most devastating defeats. For Sitting Bull and the Lakota, the stakes were nothing less than survival, as settlers and soldiers pressed westward, carving up the sacred land for railroads, gold, and greed. His people faced the loss of everything that defined them, their homes, their traditions, their freedom. Sitting Bull was not just a leader, but the spiritual anchor of his people. Every word he spoke carried the weight of 1,000 ancestors and the hopes of 1,000 children yet to be born. His vision was not just a prophecy, it was a call to arms, a rallying cry for a way of life under siege. This is the story of Sitting Bull, a man who bridged the realms of spirit and strategy, delivering a victory that would echo across history and remind the world of the unyielding strength of the Lakota people. In 1831, under the endless Dakota skies, a child was born who would come to shape the course of history. The Hunkpapa Lakota named him Tjąatjąŋka Íyotake, Buffalo Bull who sits down. This name, bestowed by his father Returns Again, carried the weight of prophecy, foretelling a life marked by strength, wisdom, and an unwavering connection to the land. From his earliest days, Tjąatjąŋka Íyotake displayed a calm demeanor and keen intelligence that set him apart from other children. While many boys played games of war, imitating the warriors they admired, he often sat in silent observation, watching the buffalo herds for hours. These animals, the lifeblood of the Lakota people, became his first great teachers. From their movements, he learned patience. From their resilience, he understood survival. The buffalo were more than prey. They were symbols of balance, embodying the relationship between the natural and spiritual worlds. Life among the Hunkpapa was an intricate dance with nature. Every movement across the prairie, every hunt and every ceremony was guided by rhythms that had been passed down for generations. Tjąatjąŋka Íyotake absorbed these teachings not as mere lessons, but as the essence of existence itself. His father recognized his potential early, remarking on the young boy's ability to listen, learn, and see the unseen. These qualities would later define his leadership. At just 10 years old, he exhibited the kind of bravery that would mark his entire life. During a buffalo hunt, when a young bull charged at his cousin, Tjąatjąŋka Íyotake intervened, diverting the animal's attention and risking his own life to save another. The elders of the tribe noted his courage, which sprang not from recklessness, but from a deep sense of responsibility and an innate understanding of danger. By his early teens, Tjąatjąŋka Íyotake's connection to the spiritual world began to deepen. Unlike many young men who sought visions through dramatic displays of endurance, he found his path in quiet moments of reflection, watching clouds gather before a storm, tracking the flight of an eagle, or listening to the melodic cries of coyotes. He saw these signs as messages from the spirit world, guiding him toward a broader understanding of his role in the tribe. At the age of 16, he undertook his first Hanblacheya, or vision quest. For 4 days and nights, he fasted and prayed alone on a hilltop, seeking guidance from the spirits. His vision was unlike those of others, who often reported scenes of conquest or glory. Instead, he saw the interconnectedness of all things, the grass, the animals, the sky, and his people. This profound realization shaped his philosophy. The survival of the Lakota was inseparable from the preservation of their way of life and their relationship with the land. When he joined his first war party against the Crow, Tjąatjąŋka Íyotake demonstrated a remarkable combination of courage and restraint. He followed the tradition of counting coup, touching an enemy warrior with his bow without taking his life. This act, far more dangerous than killing, was seen as the highest form of bravery among the Lakota. It reflected his emerging belief that true strength lay not in destruction, but in measured action. By his 20s, Tjąatjąŋka Íyotake had earned a place in the Strong Heart Warrior Society, one of the most esteemed among the Lakota. His reputation as both a warrior and a spiritual guide continued to grow. Yet, he remained humble. spending long hours with tribal elders, listening to sacred stories, and learning the ceremonies that formed the foundation of Lakota spirituality. He understood that leadership was not about commanding others but serving them, a lesson he had learned from the buffalo herds he studied as a child. The name Sitting Bull began to take on greater meaning as he grew older. Like a buffalo bull that plants its hooves against the storm, he became known for his steadfast nature and unyielding resolve. In council meetings, he often listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, his words carried the weight of thoughtful reflection and spiritual insight. His growing influence came not from seeking power, but from demonstrating wisdom and balance. These formative years forged Sitting Bull into the leader he would become. His unique blend of spiritual depth, practical wisdom, and unwavering courage prepared him to guide his people through one of the most challenging periods in their history. The lessons he learned during his youth, from the natural rhythms of the land to the sacred traditions of his people, would remain with him throughout his life, informing every decision he made. The 1850s marked a critical turning point for the Lakota people, as settlers, railroads, and military expeditions pressed relentlessly into their lands. In this era of mounting tension, Sitting Bull's rise to leadership began not with grand proclamations, but through consistent acts of wisdom, courage, and service. Sitting Bull, now in his early 30s, was known for his quiet confidence and ability to unify those around him. During one particularly harsh winter, when game was scarce, his resourcefulness saved countless lives. Instead of organizing large, high-risk hunts, he developed smaller, coordinated expeditions modeled after the behavior of buffalo herds. These smaller groups allowed for more efficient hunts, ensuring not only the survival of his own people, but also creating surplus supplies that could be shared with neighboring camps. This practical generosity strengthened alliances, proving that leadership was not about taking, but about giving. At the same time, Sitting Bull's influence grew within the Strongheart Warrior Society, one of the most respected among the Lakota. While many warriors sought personal glory through counting coup, striking an enemy in battle without killing them, Sitting Bull emphasized the collective welfare of the tribe. His tactical approach was revolutionary for the time. Instead of large, dramatic raids, he advocated for precise, coordinated actions that minimized casualties while achieving critical objectives. His warriors began to adopt a philosophy of restraint, focusing on long-term survival rather than fleeting triumphs. The Strongheart Society itself underwent a transformation under his influence. Sitting Bull introduced the concept of regular councils, where warriors would not only discuss battle strategies, but also consider the broader implications of their actions on the tribe's future. These meetings became forums for planning, reflection, and unity, ensuring that every decision was rooted in the well-being of the Lakota people. As American encroachment on indigenous lands intensified, treaty negotiations began in earnest. In 1857, Sitting Bull first demonstrated his skill as a diplomat. During a council meeting with U.S. government representatives, he stood and posed a simple yet profound question: "Would you sell your mother?" His words were a challenge to the very premise of the negotiations, framing the land as not merely property, but a sacred inheritance tied to the Lakota's identity and survival. This moment marked him as a leader who could articulate the spiritual and cultural stakes of the conflict with piercing clarity. By the 1860s, Sitting Bull recognized that the Lakota could not face these challenges alone. He began to forge alliances with neighboring tribes, including the Cheyenne and Arapaho. These partnerships were solidified through gatherings that were as much spiritual and cultural celebrations as they were military strategy sessions. Sitting Bull understood that unity was their greatest weapon against the growing threat of displacement. A pivotal moment in his rise came during a Sundance ceremony in 1864. This sacred ritual, involving days of fasting, dancing, and sacrifice, was central to Lakota spirituality. During the ceremony, Sitting Bull offered his flesh as a sacrifice, enduring intense physical pain to seek guidance from the spirits. His actions during the Sundance were seen as a profound act of devotion, solidifying his role not only as a political leader, but as a spiritual guide. Many reported visions during these ceremonies that foretold the challenges ahead, and Sitting Bull's ability to interpret and share these visions became a cornerstone of his leadership. Beyond his spiritual and military roles, Sitting Bull displayed a remarkable ability to adapt to changing circumstances. He understood that survival required more than bravery. It required foresight and adaptability. When gold was discovered in the Black Hills, bringing an influx of miners and soldiers, He organized councils to prepare for the inevitable conflicts. His approach blended tactical innovation with spiritual strength, emphasizing patience, unity, and the importance of choosing the right moment to act. Sitting Bull's growing influence was not limited to the Hunkpapa band. His wisdom and leadership resonated across the Lakota nation, and by the mid-1860s, he had become a unifying figure for his people. He balanced his roles as a warrior, a diplomat, and a spiritual leader, creating a model of leadership that transcended traditional boundaries. His reputation extended even to his enemies, with U.S. officials and military officers noting his ability to inspire loyalty and maintain unity among diverse and often fractious groups. In a time when many leaders struggled to navigate the pressures of war and diplomacy, Sitting Bull stood out for his ability to see beyond the immediate challenges. His actions during this period laid the foundation for the Lakota's most significant resistance efforts, as he prepared his people for the battles that would define the next decade of their history. The summer of 1876 dawned with a sense of foreboding across the northern plains. The largest gathering of indigenous nations in recorded history was taking place along the verdant banks of the Little Bighorn River. Thousands of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho families set up lodges stretching for miles, their vibrant encampment symbolizing a unified resistance against the relentless encroachment of the U.S. government. At the center of this unprecedented gathering stood Sitting Bull, whose spiritual leadership and vision had drawn them together. In the weeks leading up to the confrontation, Sitting Bull conducted a monumental Sundance ceremony. For 3 days he danced without food or water, offering his body as a sacrifice to the spirits. During the ritual, he experienced a vision, soldiers falling into the Lakota camp like grasshoppers, their weapons powerless against the strength of his people. Emerging from his trance, Sitting Bull shared the prophecy with his people, declaring that they would triumph in the battle to come. His vision became a source of unity and confidence, strengthening the resolve of the warriors and the community alike. The encampment was more than a show of resistance. It was a statement of cultural identity and survival. The people carried out their daily lives, hunting, preparing food, telling stories, while warriors trained and scouts patrolled the surrounding plains. Sitting Bull, though not a battlefield commander, played a pivotal role in coordinating the camp's defense. His collaboration with war chiefs like Crazy Horse, Gall, and Rain in the Face ensured that the camp was prepared for any confrontation. The camp's strategic layout, with its natural defenses and careful positioning, reflected the wisdom of generations who had lived in harmony with the land. On June 25, 1876, scouts brought urgent news. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and the 7th Cavalry were approaching. Custer, known for his audacity and disregard for indigenous strength, underestimated the sheer size and determination of the encampment. His plan to divide his forces into 3 groups was based on the assumption that a quick, decisive attack would scatter the camp. Instead, it would lead to one of the most devastating defeats in U.S. military history. As the battle began, Sitting Bull's role was primarily spiritual. While younger warriors rode out to engage the enemy, Sitting Bull remained in the camp, conducting ceremonies and praying for the protection of his people. His presence and leadership imbued the camp with a sense of calm amid the chaos. The warriors drew strength from his vision, and the knowledge that they were fighting not just for survival but for their way of life. The battle itself unfolded in a series of decisive and chaotic engagements. Custer's decision to split his forces left each group vulnerable to the overwhelming numbers and tactical brilliance of the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. Crazy Horse led a daring charge that disrupted one of Custer's flanks, while Gall executed a series of precise maneuvers that isolated and neutralized smaller groups of soldiers. The natural geography of the Little Bighorn Valley played a crucial role in the indigenous forces' success. Warriors moved fluidly across the terrain, appearing and disappearing among the hills and ravines, striking with devastating accuracy. The soldiers, unaccustomed to such warfare, found themselves overwhelmed. Custer's detachment, surrounded on a ridge that would later be called Last Stand Hill, fought valiantly but futilely against a force that outnumbered and outmaneuvered them. By the end of the day, Custer and more than 200 of his men lay dead. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of the 7th Cavalry's hubris, scattered rifles, broken wagons, and abandoned uniforms. The Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho had achieved a resounding victory, one that would echo through history as a symbol of indigenous resistance and resilience. In the aftermath of the battle, Sitting Bull's leadership was as critical as it had been during the fight. He understood the gravity of their victory and the inevitable retaliation it would provoke. That evening, he gathered the chiefs and urged them to prepare to break camp and disperse into smaller groups. His foresight proved invaluable, as the U.S. military launched a relentless campaign in the months that followed to crush indigenous resistance. For the Lakota and their allies, the Battle of Little Bighorn was not merely a military triumph. It was a moment of cultural affirmation. It demonstrated that their way of life, their traditions, and their unity could stand against even the most formidable adversaries. Yet, Sitting Bull was acutely aware of the cost. That evening, he led a ceremony of thanksgiving, but his words carried a somber tone. "They may kill me," he told his people, "but they cannot kill my vision. They may take our land, but they cannot take our spirit." The victory at Little Bighorn, though glorious, was also bittersweet. Sitting Bull knew that the U.S. government would respond with overwhelming force, and the Lakota's fight for survival was far from over. The battle became both a peak and a turning point, a moment of triumph that foreshadowed the devastating struggles to come. The aftermath of the Battle of Little Bighorn brought both triumph and tragedy for the Lakota and their allies. While the victory resonated as a powerful act of resistance, Sitting Bull understood the full implications of what had transpired. The U.S. government, humiliated by the loss, escalated its efforts to crush indigenous resistance. Thousands of additional troops were dispatched to the plains, armed with orders to track down and subdue the Lakota by any means necessary. Sitting Bull, now a symbol of defiance for the Lakota and a target of U.S. military campaigns, led his people in a desperate search for safety. As the army began to burn villages, destroy food stores, and drive the buffalo further west, life on the plains became increasingly untenable. By the winter of 1876-77, the Lakota faced the harsh reality of starvation. It was then that Sitting Bull made the fateful decision to lead his followers north, across the border into Canada, seeking sanctuary with the Northwest Mounted Police. The journey to Canada was one of immense hardship. Families traveled through deep snow and freezing winds, carrying only what they could manage. Children, elders, and the sick were protected at the center of the column, while warriors patrolled the flanks and rear, guarding against pursuing soldiers. Sitting Bull's leadership during this treacherous trek was marked by his ability to inspire perseverance. He conducted ceremonies during brief stops, offering prayers for strength and resilience, and reminded his people that the land across the border held promise and safety. When the Lakota finally reached Wood Mountain in Saskatchewan, they were met by Major James Walsh of the Northwest Mounted Police. Walsh, a pragmatic and principled man, treated Sitting Bull with cautious respect. The two men developed a mutual understanding, rooted in frank dialogue and a shared commitment to maintaining peace. Walsh refused to extradite Sitting Bull to U.S. authorities despite growing pressure, but he made it clear that Canada could not provide material support for the Lakota. Life in exile proved to be a grueling test. The buffalo herds that once roamed the Canadian plains were far smaller than those of the Lakota's traditional hunting grounds, and the bitter northern climate demanded new survival strategies. Sitting Bull worked tirelessly to maintain unity among his people, organizing hunting parties and negotiating with other indigenous groups for shared hunting rights. His council meetings became forums for innovation, where leaders discussed farming, trade, and other adaptations that could sustain them in their new environment. While Sitting Bull focused on his people's survival, the U.S. government intensified its efforts to bring him back. Delegations were sent, including former allies who had surrendered and settled on reservations. They carried promises of food and safety, coupled with warnings of the suffering that would continue if Sitting Bull refused. He dismissed their entreaties with sharp words. "You come here to tell us lies, but we don't want to hear them. Return to your people and tell them that Sitting Bull will not trade the land of his children's children for the lies of Longhair's people." As the years passed, the strain of exile began to take its toll. Hunger and hardship wore down the resolve of many families. And by 1880, increasing numbers of Lakota began drifting back to the reservations in search of food and shelter. Sitting Bull faced an agonizing decision: to remain in Canada, where survival grew ever more difficult, or to return to U.S. territory and face the uncertainties of life under government control. In July 1881, after nearly 5 years in exile, Sitting Bull made the painful choice to surrender. Leading his remaining followers to Fort Buford in Dakota Territory, he carried himself with dignity. During the formal ceremony, he addressed the soldiers and officials present with a speech that conveyed both defiance and pragmatism. "I wish it to be remembered that I was the last man of my people to surrender my rifle. "This boy," he said, placing a hand on his young son's shoulder, "has given up his gun." But Sitting Bull has not. Following his surrender, Sitting Bull and his band were held as prisoners of war at Fort Randall. Even in captivity, he maintained his role as a spiritual and cultural leader. He conducted ceremonies when permitted and taught the Lakota children stories of their ancestors, ensuring that their traditions and values would endure. Journalists occasionally visited him, and he used these opportunities to articulate the Lakota perspective, challenging misconceptions and stereotypes in the American public's imagination. His imprisonment lasted 2 years, during which he displayed remarkable adaptability. Sitting Bull learned enough English to negotiate directly with military officials, attended meetings with tribal representatives, and allowed his children to attend the fort school, though he insisted they remain rooted in Lakota culture. In May 1883, Sitting Bull and his band were transferred to the Standing Rock Agency. This transition marked a new chapter of challenges. Reservation life was defined by strict government control, with Indian agents monitoring and restricting every aspect of daily life. Sitting Bull, though watched closely, continued to lead by example. His influence extended far beyond his immediate circle, as people traveled great distances to seek his counsel and blessings. In exile and captivity, Sitting Bull demonstrated the same qualities that had defined his leadership during times of war: resilience, adaptability, and a steadfast commitment to his people's survival. Though the circumstances of his life had changed, his vision for the Lakota remained unwavering, a vision that would guide his actions in the years to come. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the untold history and remarkable journeys of people who shaped the world. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.